Now you've done it. You ignored Mama's warnings. No. You're all grown up now. You know better. Now look at yourself. All banged up, bleeding all over my nice floor, can barely catch a breath, and you're going full-on nutters to boot. What are we going to do with you? Well, that's kind of the question, ain't it? What are we going to do with you? In HarnMaster Kethira, unless the adventure is a straight-up social mystery game, something like, Medieval Clue, you're going to have some form of trauma. And being the realistic game system that it is, we're not in a world where we can just stroll on over to Harry's Happy House of Healing, fork over a couple of quid, and 6 seconds later, your arm has grown back, your cuts have grown over, and look at that, no more swamp butt. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that there's no magical healing in HarnMaster? Now, I didn't say that now, did I? I just said there's no Harry's Happy House of Healing. Not unless you want there to be. And what I'm implying here is that magical healing, although it certainly exists in the form of certain spells and elixirs, it ain't common. Not common at all. If your party has a Fivrian Shekvar with you, you're probably in a great spot. But even with a Paeonian priest among your number, you're going to still be relying on mostly mundane means for patching your mind and body. So how's this going to work? Well, that all depends on the types of trauma you experience. If you're following along in your text, which you can pick up from Celestia.com, go there and grab it, we'll be on pages 175 to 190. Let's begin. There are 2 types of trauma in HarnMaster Kethira, physical and mental. Physical trauma breaks down into fatigue, injury, and ailments. Mental trauma breaks down into fear, stress, and aural shock. Just like in real life, many of these will be resolved through rest and time, even after receiving some sort of treatment. To some, this is going to be a bit of a shock in a tabletop role-playing game. You mean I have to wait days to recover from an injury? Yeah, without magical aid, you will get treated, and then time will do its thing. So if I get beat up, I have to wait days or weeks to continue playing? No, not exactly. Look, if you lose an arm, I doubt your character is ready to saunter off as soon as the stump is cauterized, right? But for many injuries, if you're willing to take some penalties on some skills tests, then by all means, venture forth. This becomes a cautionary tale, one that reminds you to take more care and be less reckless with your character. Actions have consequences, and these consequences contribute to players having to make smarter, more thought-out decisions in HarnMaster Kethira. Let's go ahead and tackle physical trauma first, and I think you'll find out that not only is it not so bad, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Physical trauma covers fatigue, injury, and ailments. The most commonly occurring physical trauma is fatigue. Fatigue describes exhaustion or a general lack of energy, and it gets broken out into 3 categories: windedness, weariness, and weakness. Now, we don't need to get all in the weeds here. That's what the book is for. What's important is that all fatigue conditions impose penalties on most skills. So what distinguishes one category from another? Great question. They can be differentiated by how they accrue and how long they last. Think of them this way. When you sprint across a field, you get winded. A few minutes later, you're good to go again. If you're hiking most of the day with a backpack on, you're not going to be heaving breath, but you're going to be tired or pooped. You feel weary. You'll be okay after a long break or maybe a short rest. Then, if you're hungover or have the flu, you're not gasping for breath and you didn't even do anything. Well, except for that bender last night, right? Go get some help. But you're weak and, fatigued because of your condition. And you're going to stay that way until you get rid of the underlying cause. Yet regardless of how you got fatigued and how long it lasts, the actual effects are the same. So long as the fatigue is present, it penalizes all success tests and movement unless the rules state otherwise. And there's really two ways to get rid of fatigue: rest and or get rid of the underlying cause. There. Now that was 1 minute and 42 seconds. That wasn't so bad. The next source of physical trauma we'll look at is physical injury. Now, look, this is the big section. Don't lie, it's the one you came here to watch, so buckle up. Injuries impart penalties or restrictions of use to skills based on the injury's location. With an injured leg, for example, you'll either suffer movement penalties, or maybe you can't even move at all without assistance. But you could still math and draw okay. Unless you're one of those types with no arms and has to draw with feet. But anyway, these penalties persist until the injury is healed. Most healing in HarnMaster Kethira is done through mundane means, so that's what we're looking at, the healing sequence. Probably one of the biggest differentiators between HarnMaster and other gaming systems. For a quick primer on the acquisition of injuries and their impact types, I refer you to the combat tutorial and demo. Assuming you've already done those, I'll just give this quick summary and then we're going to move right on ahead. Injuries occur in specific locations, such as the right knee, and are described by an injury severity, described as minor, serious, or grievous, an injury level from 1 to 5, and an aspect, either an edge, blunt, point, or fire or frost impact. We'll need these designations in the healing sequence. To patch up injuries, there are 3 basic requirements: a character with the physician skill, the higher the better, the proper tools and materials for the type of injury and treatment, and time. We also want to review some terms and concepts before moving forward, because they're going to be used at different times when going through the healing sequence. I'd rather get them out of the way now. The first is healing base, which is determined when generating your character. It's the average of endurance and will. This is going to be used while making healing rolls. Next is the healing rate. Treatments will generate a numerical result, usually between 2 and 6, called a healing rate, a multiple to be used with the healing base. Healing rolls will be made later on to determine if the injury improves, remains the same, or gets worse. Now, if you're suddenly already going, wait, healing bases, healing rates, healing rolls, target numbers, multiples, just remember, it's just like the skills bases and mastery levels when you made your character, and I mean just like it. You had skill bases, you have a healing base. You had a skill multiplier to determine your starting skills, you have a healing rate to determine your starting recovery. When you make skills tests to use said skills, you make healing rolls to get better. See? Actually pretty simple, right? Right. Now, let's look at the healing sequence. There are 5 pages in the manual covering all of the details. We're not doing that. It's a simple tutorial, not a detailed step-by-step how-to. Therefore, let's summarize. It goes like this. Stop the bleeding. Bring the patient out of extended shock. Determine coma details. Diagnose the injury. Make a treatment roll. And then at this point, time and the body will do their thing. Every 5 days, make a healing roll to see if the wound improves. Deal with any infections daily. And apply penalties to skills until the wound is healed. Because this is the main course of this tutorial, let's dig a bit deeper into these steps. Bleeding. First, any bleeding needs to be stopped. We're not talking about just regular bleeding, like from a paper cut or nicking yourself with a cheese knife, or even getting a nasty cut from a sword. In medical terms, we're talking about arterial or venous bleeding. That's either spurting out or free-flowing, something from which you can actually bleed to death. During this step, players are actually losing life-threatening amounts of blood, and it's tracked alongside the shock table. If the player reaches KIA, that's lights out. Extended shock. If someone failed a shock reroll test and is currently in extended shock, It's generally advisable to treat that before continuing. Why? Because folk in extended shock do not recover fatigue. And fatigue applies penalties that can ultimately stack with other penalties in different phases of the process. Attending physicians can apply bonuses to the extended shock course roll, but ultimately this is a test of the patient's healing base times the healing rate obtained from the shock reroll table. Coma. If an unconscious character scored a critical fail on a shock reroll, he slips into a coma. These can last days or even months, depending on the severity. And the severity is determined by the injury level and location shock. Now, regarding extended shock and coma, we can still treat a patient who is in shock and in a coma. It's generally a good idea, however, to minimize those penalties, such as fatigue, for shock and coma course rolls as soon as possible. Injury type. Let's get down to brass tacks. Let's figure out how to treat the wound so it can start healing. We cross-reference the strike aspect that caused the wound and the severity on the appropriate table, and this will reveal what treatments are required, along with any modifiers, possible complications, and chances of infection. Treatment. Locating the appropriate table for the injury aspect and cross-referencing the severity, the physician finally tests his or her skill. This establishes a healing rate from 1 to 6, the higher the better, and concludes the treatment. Notice that even critical failures produce a treated wound with an HR, although usually with a chance of infection. And see these boxes? They indicate possible side effects. We're going to see more about one of these shortly. At this point, the urgency is past. Wounds have been treated, and now it's up to time and the body. Let's take a look at the actual healing. Healing. Healing rolls are made every 5 days, a success test against a target number of healing base times healing rate. Successes reduce the injury level by 1 or 2, while critical failures could bring the risk of infection. Once an injury reduces from an M1, it is healed and can be removed from the character sheet. In practical terms, this tends to look like this. Grievous injuries are punishing, and they can take about 20 days to heal completely, going down to serious and minor along its course. Similarly, serious injuries can take a 10-day, the Harnick week, at which point the character should be right as rain. Infection. A critical fail on a healing roll may cause the wound to become infected, and infections get nasty, because if any wound gets infected, all injuries stop healing until the infection is removed. These are handled just like wound healing, and bonuses can be applied by a treating physician, but the big difference is that these are made daily, not every 5 days. Infection also contributes weakness fatigue until the infection is cured, and then healing of injuries resumes. See what we did? We have a callback to fatigue, with an underlying condition causing weakness fatigue until it's cured. Yeah, how about that? Impairment. Until the wound is fully healed, skills involving the wounded area will suffer penalties. Minor wounds typically give a 5-point penalty, and serious wounds impart a 10-point penalty. And for any body part with a grievous wound, well, skills involving that body part just can't be used. That kind of looks like a lot, right? But as per usual, let's do an example and see how this plays out in a situation. For this situation, I don't want to go all out crazy nutters with gushing bleeders and comas and all that stuff, because those are more often exceptions than the norm. Nevertheless, I'm going to make this a little less than ideal scenario. Let's have a look. Victory was ill won for Agano. He felled his foe with a mighty blow, but only after receiving a crushing strike to his shin. Sadie and her assistant, Ratchet, prepare to treat the wound. Remember this one? We're going to keep it simple. First, Agano has no bleeding to be treated, so scratch that one. Second, he's not in a state of extended shock, so scratch that one. Third, no shock, no coma, scratch it. Fourth, it's an S3B to the calf, so we're going to use the blunt treatment table. Man, this isn't bad at all, right? We're already halfway done. Fifth, what do we find on that table for serious wounds? The treatment we need to perform is to set and splint the area. Fair enough. Now we need to ask, do Sadie and Ratchet have the time and materials to do this? Why, sure they do. They certainly have the time. It only takes 15 minutes. And all they need are some sticks and some rolled up cloth and something with which to tie them. Turns out, they got all that. We also see that this is going to provide a +10 bonus to the physician ML we're going to test. And remember I mentioned these possible side effects? Should treatments fail, Agano might end up with permanent impairment to that shin. Permanent. Right. Here we go. Sadie has a physician ML of 68. Ratchet's is 49, and so she's going to lend her skill index of 4 as an assistance bonus to Sadie. And the treatment of set and splint gives another +10 to give her an EML of 82. Well, that ought to be easy. And Sadie rolls an 83. That's a failure. But the procedure is done and the wound is treated. It now has a healing rate of 4. In terms of gameplay, we're done for now. We skip steps 6 and 7 unless there's some magical healing involved, which there's not in this case. So we skip those and we come to the final part. 8th, we make a note that Agano will have a -10 penalty to any skill involving that leg. At least, and this is important, at least until the wound heals to a minor wound, at which point the penalty is only -5, and then once it's fully healed, no more penalties. Maybe. This means that right now, at minimum, he will lose 10 points of movement and will likewise suffer a 10-point penalty to tests involving acrobatics, agility, archery, climbing, dancing, dodge, jump, melee, all skills involving agility. There's GM discretion with these, of course. If there's an argument to be made that the character's doing something that somehow doesn't need that leg, then perhaps the penalty can be negated. At this point, Agano is ready to continue playing. Up to now, all we did was treat the injury. Ain't no healing yet. So let's look at that. Healing rolls happen every 5 days after the injury is treated. The injury, remember, is an S3B, and Agano has a healing base of 13 and now a healing rate of 4, remember? 5 days go past. Agano rolls a 4 against 52, so that's a success. Yay for him. That reduces the injury level by 1 to an S2B. Still a serious wound, so the 10-point penalty remains. So far, so good. 5 days later, Agano rolls again. This time he rolls a 67 against 52, which is a failure. There's no healing at this time. When day 15 arrives, a very important date for Agano, as we're going to see in a moment, his player tests again, rolling a 56 versus 52, another failure. This means his penalties remain, and the wound doesn't get any better still. Day 20 comes along, and because the wound has not yet healed to, at worst, a minor wound, Agano will now suffer permanently a 5-point penalty to all of those impacted skills. This penalty doesn't stack with the current 10-point penalty for the serious injury, just that when the wound heals up as best as it can, that leg is screwed up for good. Let's hope this thing heals before another 20 days pass, else that permanent penalty gets worse. Agano's player rolls a 27 versus 52, finally a success. And now, just a day too late, the injury is an M1B. But only one more injury level to go. Day 25, Agano's player rolls a critical success of 15 against 52, and the wound is fully healed, leaving Agano with a lifelong limp. You know what sucks about this? If that 15 would have been rolled on day 5 or even day 10, there'd be no permanent injury. Agano's wound would have reduced 2 injury levels back then because of the critical success, becoming a minor wound or being fully healed. Poor Agano. Maybe he should find another player, someone with better dice. We're going to wrap up the healing routine here. I could show several other examples. We could look at blood loss, comas, cauterization, infection, grim wounds, and more. However, I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, I ain't here to give up all the goods in book. I'm just here to show you the basic ropes, okay? Well, what about magical healing? Oh, it's there. There are alchemical elixirs of healing and Phivrian spells like balm and slumber, but these usually induce a single healing roll per injury. So they act to speed up the healing process, but doesn't quite patch up that gaping gash in a miraculous flash of light. We'd use miracles for that. The closest spell for rapid wound healing is the Phivrian spell Succor. Succor, not like I'm going to get you, sucker, but you know what I mean. And even that will still require a few days instead of weeks for serious wounds to heal. The last category of physical trauma in HMK is ailments. Things like asphyxia, disease, exposure, malnutrition, poisons and toxins, and sleep deprivation. That's quite a few categories. And although there are some similarities, it's just kind of a big basket of, and then there's this. Know what I mean? Let's brush through most of these, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time on disease, poisons, and toxins, just because, at least in my adventures, these are the ones I run into the most. Asphyxia. Whether it's drowning, being choked out, or smoke inhalation, the amount of time a character can hold his or her breath is a number of 5-second rounds equal to endurance and a will success value test. Once this amount of time passes, the character falls unconscious and is at risk of dying. Afterwards, if conscious, the character has 5 windedness fatigue. If unconscious, the player makes a shock reroll without that usual -20 penalty, modified with an endurance success value test. Disease and poisons and toxins. Diseases and poisons and toxins all work in a similar manner. The main difference is time. All involve the acquiring of some sort of condition that manifests symptoms, and with time and treatment, either the victim suffers the worst of it, which is sometimes death, or it gets better. Here's how they work. Transmission. This tells us how you get the condition, whether it's a disease you contract, a toxin you ingest, or a poison to which you've been subjected. Contagion. For diseases, we have to see if you actually contract it once exposed to it. You test endurance against a disease's contagion index to see if your character contracts it. Now notice this doesn't apply to poisons and toxins. You're either poisoned or intoxicated, or you're not. There's not a % chance you don't get drunk from hammering vodka. There's not a % chance you don't get poisoned from eating a mouthful of Comet. Thus, there is no contagion step for poisons and toxins. If you met the criteria for transmission, you got it. Onset. This refers to the time between succumbing to the disease or taking in the substance and the first appearance of symptoms. Most diseases take days to manifest symptoms, while poisons and toxins can take minutes. Symptoms. After the onset period, the symptoms, whatever they are, begin to show. If nothing beforehand warned the character, this is the final indicator of something's wrong here. Virulence. Virulence refers to the punch, how hard the condition hits, which is measured by the assigned healing rate for recovery. Anything with HR 1 or 2 is considered lethal. Remember what that means. That means you have to roll your healing base times 1 or 2 in order to improve. Yeesh. Treatment. For poison, treatment is typically in the form of the anti-venom herbal concoction. For others, maybe even for poison if the GM allows it, an attending physician makes a physician success value test, applying the result as a bonus to the course rolls. And what's a course roll? The player makes course rolls just like injury recovery. It's the healing base times the healing rate. For diseases, this is a daily roll, whereas poisons and toxins, it can be every several minutes. The results grant changes to the healing rate. Outcome. After each course roll, after the healing rate changes, hopefully, characters exhibit certain conditions depending on what the healing rate is now. These become physical indicators to the victim as to whether he or she is improving or getting worse. Let's look at an example scenario for this one. The battle is over, but Sir Muckenfudge has been bitten by the giant spider. Highly confident that it's not simply a mere bite, Spicolius, the group physician and herbalist, gets to work. He prepares an anti-venom concoction with herbs gathered on the journey. After 10 minutes, Spicolius produces a mild anti-venom off of an Herblore SV5. Regarding Sir Muckenfudge, their suspicions are correct. He is indeed poisoned, and the transmission was by vector. The onset is 10 minutes, right as Spicolius finishes his concoction. Just as Spicolius finishes preparing an antivenom, Sir Muckenfudge experiences severe pain and swelling at the puncture wound. There's no doubt now the spider's venom is poisonous to humans. The spider's venom has a virulence of HR3. Could be worse, but it ain't great. This is a dangerous poison. Spicolius begins his treatment. The GM allows him to make a physician success value test in addition to administering the antivenom, and he generates an SV6. At the 20-minute mark, Sir Muckenfudge makes a course roll. This will be his healing base of 15 times the healing rate of 3. But now he gets plus 6 from Spicolius and plus 5 from the antivenom. This gives him a target number of 56. Much better than the original 45 he would have had to roll against. Better still, these bonuses apply throughout the course of the poison, either until Sir Muckenfudge recovers, or he's going to be fine. His player rolls a 25 for a critical success, which gives plus 2 healing rate for HR5. On the outcomes table, we see this is accompanied by 5 weakness fatigue. Much better than 10 or being stunned. And so this process continues every 10 minutes until Sir Muckenfudge achieves HR6 or he horribly degenerates and snuffs it. Exposure. Heat and cold exposure works very similarly to each other. They follow the same routines, and some of these terms will look familiar. Virulence determines how hard the condition hits, remember, setting the initial HR rate. Advance. This one's a little different. So long as exposure continues, the players have to test healing base times healing rate, not to get better, but to see if their conditions worsen as expressed by reducing the HR. Symptoms appear along with associated healing rates, and they vary according to the type of exposure. Recovery. Recovering can only begin once removed from the exposure conditions and after any required treatments, like warming if you're freezing, or cooling compresses if you're overheated. Malnutrition. Very similar to exposure is malnutrition, whether it's from starvation or dehydration. The only serious difference, again, other than subject matter and time, is onset. After a full day without food or water, starvation or dehydration begins to set in. Virulence measures how hard it hits, just like most other ailments. Advance. Again, like exposure, it advances at regular intervals and risks worsening the healing rate. Symptoms manifest themselves throughout the condition in accordance with whether it's starvation or dehydration. And recovery begins once food or water is consumed. Sleep deprivation. Lastly, sleep deprivation doesn't even have a real routine. Basically, for every 24 hours your character doesn't sleep, you get a 15-point weariness fatigue penalty, and then you can possibly offset some of that with an endurance secondary roll. Additionally, for every 30 such fatigue, your character gains some mental trauma, like a hallucination. Mental trauma's next, so let's put a pin in that. This all continues until your character gets some shut-eye, much like malnutrition and exposure. Beyond punishment to the body, adventurers often face intrusions upstairs, in the attic, so to speak. In HarnMaster Kethira, these are covered by fear, stress, and aural shock. GMs can subject characters to fear and direct players to make fear rolls. These are simple tests of will and can have similar results to morale tests, but there's a twist for failure. For starters, let's take a look at the fear roll. On a successful will test, your character is steady, good to go against the source of fear. On a critical success, you get brave in the face of this fear, gaining a 20-point bonus to all fear and morale rolls for 5 minutes. So far, identical to morale tests. A failure means you're afraid. The only available defenses are block and dodge, and on his or her turn, the character must either pass or move away from the source of fear, after which the character makes fear rolls each round until succeeding or getting one of these. A critical failure 5, a CF5, means the character is terrified and must flee on his or her turn, or pass if movement is impossible. There are no more rerolls, and the character will recover once safe from the fear source for 10 minutes. A CF0 means the character is catatonic, paralyzed with fear. You can only retest each round until succeeding, and at that point, your condition only upgrades to terrified. Now here's where things get interesting. Either critical failure, either a CF0 or a CF5, gives you free psyops that you can run against your enemies, which also gets accompanied by Abe Lincoln. If you have just a regular roll failure, then you only get Abe Lincoln. What is a half Abe? Hey, Carrie, got a sec?
Yeah, sure. What's up?
I'm doing the fear roll table, and I've already got the regular results and all that. Now, I understand to make things not so harsh, critical failures can be mitigated by 1 or 2 psyops accompanied by Abe Lincoln. And on a failure, you just get Abe Lincoln to help out. But I guess my question is, I'm really not clear on what a half Abe is. You hear me okay?
Are you seriously telling me you think ABE is for Abe Lincoln? Did you even read the rules, Frog?
I mean, I like to think I read
most
most
of them. Oh, you'd like to think that.
Like, I read the chart.
It's right underneath the chart. It's not Abe Lincoln Frog. Why would there be psyops on a fear roll? What even is a psyop? What's the matter with you? Is that what you seriously thought? Abe Lincoln.
I mean, he has an axe, right? And
It's
something
aberrance,
about
Frog. Aberrance. And it's not a psyop, it's psyche stress. Like you're giving me right now. You get the listed number plus aberrance, or half aberrance, towards psyche stress levels. You got it?
I'm sorry, Carrie.
Sorry? This is a monumental level of idiocy. Abe Lincoln, I don't even know where to begin. How long have you been doing this? People trust you to put this together, and I thought you had a modicum of intelligence, but apparently I was wrong about that.
Son of a... Well, okay then. Either critical failure gives your character psyche stress levels, either 1 or 2 at minimum. Some creatures, such as Evashu, carry an attribute called aberrance. Encountering any creature with aberrance requires a fear roll, apparently, and makes the accrual of psyche stress highly likely, adding to the listed amount of psyche stress. Notice that with aberrance, one can still acquire psyche stress even with a success on the fear roll. So half. I got it. Then we come to psyche stress, the mental equivalent of injuries. There are spells and natural events, as in the critical failure of fear rolls, that wound the mind. When this occurs, characters accrue psyche traits and psyche stress levels. Psyche traits are things like depression, hallucinations, phobias, and the like. There's actually a 10-item list in the manual that may be used, but GMs are fully within their rights to add custom entries as well. The psyche stress level of 1 to 6 is associated with a trait. These levels not only give some indication of how long the trait's expected to last, but each psyche stress level contributes 5 weakness fatigue. Thus, the higher the level, the more taxing the mental stress. These are perfectly analogous to injuries, whereas a shoulder may get a serious 2 piercing wound and give -10 impairment. The mind may get a recklessness trait with psyche stress 2 and 10 points of weakness. Healing the shoulder would remove the impairment, and similarly, recovery from the psyche stress 2 removes the weakness. If the character acquires the exact same trait again without recovering from the original, not a different one, the exact same one, then the stress levels combine and the trait increases in intensity to become an impulse, and from an impulse to a disorder. Well, what's the difference in those? Well, let's look at them in game terms like this. For traits, you're just going to role play those as appropriate. For impulses, though, you're going to need to succeed on a will test in order to suppress the urge to act on them. And disorders, they're going to need a critical success on a will test. What about recovery then? How do you get better from it? Recovery involves a will test every D6 days to reduce the stress levels, and when the psyche stress level is reduced to 0, the trait may disappear. Well, la-di-da, what do you mean by may? Should any will test during the recovery process result in a critical failure, that trait, regardless of its intensity, if it's a trait, impulse, or disorder, becomes a permanent one, remaining even after all the psyche stress levels disappear. So although the character no longer experiences the weakness fatigue, a permanent condition means this character will forever risk erratic behavior, either through role-playing or depending upon a successful will test or critical success to suppress it. Many esoteric, spiritual, and divine experiences might sever the character's ability to use aura-based skills, and that includes fate rolls. There are many ways to acquire aural shock. Certain spell effects, failed spell research, soul dissolution, spell misfires, ill effects from imbibing elixirs, and many other sources. When acquired, aural shock is rated 1 to 6, with each level producing 5 weakness fatigue. For example, in the heat of combat, Fizzbang casts Globe and rolls a critical failure on his spellcasting roll. Rolling on the spell misfire list, he rolls 88 for a serious principal leak, which gives him aural shock 3. He obtains 15 weakness fatigue due to the aural shock level of 3. But worse yet, he can no longer use any skills using aura. That includes casting spells. Recovery involves daily tests on the aural shock recovery table in order to reduce the aural shock levels and their associated weakness. Once reduced to 0, the character's ability to use aura-based skills is restored. Thankfully, fatigue and impairment do not apply to aural shock recovery rolls. Well, how's that? That's a big one, I think. A lot of content covered there, and that's just the basics. Nevertheless, the trauma covered here should take care of most circumstances you encounter in a HarnMaster Kethira adventure. Physical trauma will be encountered in nearly all adventures, again, outside of strict role-playing social adventures. Fatigue, injuries, and ailments, they'll occur from combat and nearly any physical activity. On the other hand, mental trauma, though common, can be slightly less common. Most characters will experience fear to some degree, and perhaps as an unlucky result from that, some psyche stress. Meanwhile, aural shock will likely only be encountered by those dabbling in the esoteric, divine, or astral pursuits. I'd like to give a special shout out to Kerry Dolan for his assistance with this tutorial. I encourage everyone to check out his most excellent Mind Your Manners podcast for long-form interviews with the movers and shakers in all things Harn-related. And be sure to join the HarnMaster Kethira Discord channel. Ask your questions there and come find some folks to start a game. Until next time, venture forth.